The first question that Vicki gave me was, how did we start the Conflict Center? And it really started long before 1987. In 1975, I moved to Denver and taught in a barrio school on the near west side. My only real teaching experience in the sense of traditional classroom. I was a social studies and language arts teacher for middle school. And it was a hoot and a holler because they'd gotten rid of 2 teachers before they hired me, and I was a brand new teacher, no experience, just graduated from college at the ripe old age of 33, I think, 32, I don't know, and had moved to Colorado, and I was a single parent with 3 kids, so it was a whole new world for me, and then had these wild and woolly kids that had run out 2 teachers, so it was quite a thrill starting your teaching that way. But I absolutely loved it, and really had a good faculty to work with that really taught me how to teach. You know, in education school, you learn your subject matter and you learn all the theories of education, well, some of the theories of education, but you really don't learn to teach till you teach, and it's an experience that's humbling for every beginning teacher, and it was for me. Anyway, at presentation, the second year I was there, we began to see dramatic increases in levels of violence, and even back then. And it just, there were more fights in the school, there were more fights on the playgrounds, physical fights. There was a lot more verbal violence, and it was increasing. And the third year, we said, you know, this is not what we are taking these fabulous salaries for. At that time, I think I was making $6,000 a year teaching full-time, and then as a volunteer doing evening classes for parents, you know, and that was my full payment for all of that, was $6,000 a year. And we said, we aren't taking these big salaries just to referee. We got to do something. And we tried to figure out what we could do as a faculty and staff. And we had a good principal that really encouraged people to think, and we had some really strong educators that had been teaching for several years. And so, as a group, we collectively came up with the idea of doing an interpersonal understanding program, and we named it that just out of the blue because we didn't have any other language for it, that we wanted kids to get along better. And in that program, we taught communication, cooperation, and conflict management. We made up the term conflict management because we wanted them to learn how to handle their hassles without violence. And so that term wasn't used in those days, and we just made it up for our little program. And we made up the curriculum because there were no affective education materials. But the results were rather dramatic. In less than a semester's time, we had completely eliminated all physical fighting in that school and reduced the verbal fighting significantly. And after 2 years of the program, which there was no physical fighting, honest and true, it just didn't happen. Now, maybe it happened after school, or maybe it happened at the park, or yada yada. I'm not saying any of them grew wings, but there was no fighting in the school. At the end of either a semester and a half or two, I mean, a year and a half or 2 years, I can't remember exactly, 2 7th graders in a passing period smacked each other. And that was the first time there was any physical fighting. They were aghast that they had done such a thing, which was amazing. And the whole school went into mourning because the peace had been broken. And that's where I got the fire in my belly that said, this is what God wants of me. This is what life should be about for me. This is what I'm going to do. Because never had I seen kids own it. I'd been an activist for all my life. I started with civil rights and always cared about justice, and it came out of a faith perspective for me, and it was a big deal to try to make a more just and peaceful world for my whole life. But trying to shape up Gorbachev and Reagan and people like that, I was not very successful. And this felt like real meaningful success in the sense the kids owned it. It wasn't something we were doing to them, for them, about them. It was them owning this that made the huge difference and made me a believer for life, that this really is something that can work for everybody to bring about real peace. From there, worked with Cornerstone Justice and Peace Center, which had 3 projects, a criminal justice project, a global education project, and then I started the conflict project there with Patty Lawless, who's still an activist in Denver now, working hard on immigration issues. And until that went bankrupt and belly up, and then we started the conflict center. And it wasn't just me. I mean, I was the only person that got a salary, if you can call it that, at that time. It was pretty iffy and pretty difficult at the beginning. There was no money, and I got $2,000 severance pay from Cornerstone, and that was the foundation of money to pay myself the next salary that I didn't have. And so I've never been good enough at raising funding that I had it all in a row. But with Ron's help and a lot of other people's help, Ronnie's help soon, we were able to raise lots and lots of money over the years. But that's how it started. The Cornerstone went bankrupt and closed, and I had a choice of going back to teaching or going forward with the conflict center, which had always been a dream to have such a place. And so with a lot of fear and trepidation, it began. How to Avoid World War III was our first book. And it came out of my going, she went to a parenting workshop I did, and I showed up with papers flying in all directions, which was frequently my mode of operation, and said, Liz, you have to write a book because you got to get these papers organized. And I said, oh, sure, in my spare time, I'll do that. Count on it, look for it on Amazon. You know, what I brought from presentation was a good reputation with educators, and then what I brought from Cornerstone was the justice stuff that connected it together, that peacemaking had to be the basis of justice, and or justice had to be the basis of peacemaking. It's hand in glove. And so there were some constituents that wanted work. Very few of them had any budget, but they wanted work. And so we started just doing, and always did free work, always did work for people that had no resources, and then tried to do enough paid to keep the place afloat. Our first budget for the year was $18,000. We didn't make it. We didn't make the second year either. But the third year we finally made our budget, which meant, there just was not any money. It had to be a leap of faith and enough money to scrap by. And then sometimes I did odd jobs just to make a little extra money because I had 3 kids to take care of too. And so it wasn't just me. But that's how we began.
She was asking a number of us what she should do, and I argued very, very strongly for her not to start a nonprofit. I don't know whether she remembers that.
I do.
I said she was wrong.
And where would you be if
I
we
know.
had followed your advice?
I'm telling you, I'm wrong. She was right. But anyway, truly the story is, where would we be today if she hadn't if she'd done what I'd suggested? You wouldn't see this facility. You wouldn't have this library that we're sitting in. It would have all just been her work, and then it would, she might have had some people, associates that would have worked with her, but it probably wouldn't have survived and lasted. And so actually, she was very wise to choose to do a nonprofit, even though she didn't take my really solid, good advice. She insisted, and the board went along with it, typical, that they base everything on a consensus model so that all the decisions, everybody had to agree to it. And if they didn't agree, they worked on it until everybody could agree.
Or we put it aside and waited and
was...
revisited it until we got to where we could all be happy.
And as I recall, there was the story that I heard that the only vote that was ever taken was when it revolved around getting this building. And they stood across the street here and debated whether to accept this building because it was questioned whether it was a real asset or whether it was a asbestos-ridden liability.
Which it was.
And one board member, Jesse, I think, has told us that he just could not vote for that, and that was the one time that the board felt like they had to make a decision and move forward. And so they have the provision, and we still have it, that they can make a decision if there's a crucial issue.
Well, we really were passionate about it. We served 30,000 people one year.
Wow.
30,000 people. And that's a lot of people with a staff of 14. The core curriculum is interpersonal skill building, and it is to teach people to the practical skills of peacemaking. And so it starts with problem ownership. I mean, everybody that's in conflict owns a piece of the problem. If they aren't owning a piece of the problem, you aren't going to get a solution. So, that's at the core. At the core is nobody's perfect. Nobody has the one right answer. Together, we can make better answers than we can individually, stuff like that. It's building good communication skills. And thinking outside the box. If the first thing doesn't work, then you have to have number 2, number 3, number 4. A lot of people don't know how to brainstorm. Brainstorming is a critical skill to be able to problem solve, because oftentimes the first thing, even if it's a great idea, if it doesn't work, you got to try something else. And so being flexible and being able to think outside the box is important. Being able to problem solve, to see conflict as a problem, not to see the person as a problem, but the issue as a problem, the situation as a problem, and then to be able to dissect it and say, okay, we've tried this and this part worked, that part didn't, throw away that part. We get so much ego in I'm right and you're wrong in our culture, I think, in the U.S., that we don't think enough about this part worked, that part didn't. It could be the greatest idea ever, but if it didn't work, we need to move on. I think there's a niche here that is nobody else is doing, nationally or locally. They'll do pieces of it, they'll take parts of it, but nobody else is doing it, and that's why it's been so successful over the years. Is everybody has conflict every day. Everybody needs to do a little better with conflict every day. You have those jobs to do that. There aren't very many people that can say, I do something that most people can't do, or are afraid to do, or feel inadequate to do. You give people confidence that they can do it.